Hello and welcome to this revision video which focuses on how to respond to language used in the media texts. Previous exam questions have always asked candidates to write about language, and we would suggest you make this a priority for your revision, particularly how to use quotes effectively. So what might you be asked? One bullet point will almost certainly ask you to comment on the writer's use of language in at least one of the media texts. It will probably ask you to focus on how the writer engages the reader and tries to make the text interesting. This part of the question is worth several of the available marks, so you should spend around 15 minutes writing about language. It is worth considering what writing about language actually means, because you'll be asked to use this skill for the poetry question and the non-fiction question as well. You'll also need to write about language if you're studying English literature. It refers to identifying individual words, phrases or sentences which the writer has used to create specific effects which impact upon the reader. Generally, teachers encourage students to P on the page, or an equivalent acronym, to write about language. P stands for point, evidence, explain. First, make an observation about the writer's use of language. For example, you could identify a technique or comment on its tone. Next, show some evidence of this by using a quote from the text to back up the point. Finally, you should explain the effect of the quote on the reader. In other words, how does it make them feel? What is the impact? What do they visualise or think about? The example responses to language in this video focus on a section of Do a Pig a Favour from page 5 and all use P on the page. There isn't really time to go through all of the text individually, so we've picked examples for the purpose of this video. You should have made your own notes and annotations on the text in class. The following responses are therefore for guidance only. They are not meant to be put together to form a complete exam answer. It will be up to you to decide which quotes to choose and write about depending on the question you're asked. You'll need to give as many examples as you can in the time available. We'll focus on the first 3 paragraphs of Giles Coren's text. Remember that his article is a piece of opinion writing and contains argument and persuasive techniques, so we'll be looking at examples which demonstrate these styles. Other texts have different purposes, and so you'll need to look for different uses of language. Here's the text. You may want to pause the video for a moment to give yourself time to read. Okay, I'm now going to highlight a few areas of the text which I would write about if the question asks for me to comment on how Coren makes his writing interesting. Let's go through the quotes in turn, identify the technique, look at a brief exam-style response to each one using P on the page to structure the answer. This opening to the article uses calm, unbiased language. It is also quite boring and unexciting as a first sentence. The key word here is appears, because it is a harmless and safe word which contains no opinion or bias. Here's a model response using P. The writer opens the article using a calm tone. He says, "A report from America published this week appears to show." He uses a dull sentence to start off and uses the word appears to keep his tone balanced. This makes the reader think the article will be unbiased. Notice how we made a point about the text. It starts calmly. We use the quote as evidence. Then we explain the effect on the reader, what it makes the reader think. The reason why Coren starts his article in quite a boring way is to surprise us with what comes next. At the start of the next paragraph, Coren begins his sarcastic attack on his target audience. The tone change surprises the reader after the fairly boring and unbiased opening. Here, he mocks the American accent with duh and dialect with like, which Americans use quite a lot in their speech. The key word to focus on is duh. Here's a P on the page response. The unexpected change of tone to sarcastic surprises the reader after the boring opening, and I'm like duh suddenly mocks the American accent and dialect, conveying the idea the report's findings are stupid and obvious. The reader now wants to find out what else Coren will say. In the next example, Coren uses repetition to emphasise the stupidity he thinks exists in vegetarians. The repetition is sarcastic and makes the sentence sound obvious to everyone except vegetarians. The key words to focus on are eating disorder. The writer uses repetition to make his argument sound obvious. He repeats the phrase eating disorder to make vegetarians feel stupid. His tone is sarcastic and shows the reader that he strongly disagrees with vegetarianism. Next, the writer uses humour in an ironic way, which mocks vegetarians but will perhaps make other readers laugh. The key word here is better. Coren employs humour to make non-vegetarians laugh. He says it's a better eating disorder than many others. This is ironic because no eating disorder is a good thing or better than any other. They are all dangerous to health. This sentence may also offend vegetarians and others because it is insensitive. Emotive language is any which causes an emotional response in the reader. Here it contains anger at vegetarians and it's designed to insult them. The rule of three impacts on the reader because the three descriptions build up a picture. The rule of three is a useful and well-known psychological technique because our brains respond to sets of three ideas very effectively. So the key words are pale, flaky, and unbelievably tedious. The writer uses a rule of three to describe vegetarians in an insulting and angry way. He says vegetarians make them pale, flaky, and unbelievably tedious. The three negative phrases work together to present vegetarians as unhealthy, unreliable, and boring. This would insult vegetarians and surprise or amuse other readers. Next, Corin piles on the sarcasm about vegetarianism by comparing it to suicide. He is also criticising vegetarianism as a lifestyle choice, saying that it's transparent or see-through, in other words, pointless. Keywords to focus on here are the phrases cry for help and sadly transparent. Corin continues his attack on vegetarians by comparing their choice of eating habits to desperation. Vegetarianism is a cry for help. The reader will associate the phrase a cry for help with suicide. He follows this by saying their lifestyle is a sadly transparent attempt to take control. These phrases sarcastically say vegetarianism is pointless with no real purpose. Directly addressing the reader is an effective way of drawing them in and keeping them interested. The pronoun you is used to attack vegetarians directly. It speaks to them and involves all readers in the argument that Corin is putting forward. The keyword is therefore you. The writer draws in the reader by addressing them directly with the pronoun you. He does this to again insult vegetarians who he says are probably unaware of the reasons they gave up meat. The final technique I would consider from the extract is the phrase it's why. This connective introduces reasons for his point of view and signposts an argument to the reader. This helps to lead the reader through his ideas and keep them interested. Corin engages the reader in his argument by signposting reasons for his opinions. He uses the phrase it's why twice to give the impression he has thought about his argument and makes them sound reasonable. These examples have provided just a small range of the techniques the writers have used across all of the media text. There are many others which you could draw upon to form an answer depending on which text you are asked about and the audience and purpose of that text. So let's summarise what you should write about. Consider who the language is aimed at and what the purpose of the text is. If it's persuasive, the language used will be very different from one which is informative. How does the language used interest the reader? What's the tone? Does it change? Is figurative or emotive language used? Crucially, give examples and explain their effect on the reader. What does it make us think, feel, or visualise as we are reading? Keep your comments as brief as possible using P to structure your points. Say as much as you can in around 15 minutes. That concludes this commentary on writing about language in the media text. Hope you found it useful. Please see our other videos on YouTube on the media text and on the poems from other cultures. The very best of luck in your exams.